Kat, can you hear my audio? Very narrow depth of field today. I feel like I'm in a dreamscape. Great, thank you, Kat. Welcome to the August 1st salon, first Thursday of every month. We should wait a minute, should I, Kat, for a couple people to come in. It's going to be an interesting talk today. This was something that, yes. I know we've said this, Kat. We need to start doing a countdown. Uh, you know, like we have one. Oh, well, there you go. We need to start using it. But yeah, we should start doing a countdown so that people can kind of be in here and maybe an exciting animation. Maybe we can get Johnny to make something for us. Wow, we have such a narrow depth of field here today. If I move from here. Okay, so I'm gonna start. Thank you for joining us, whether you have joined our live discussion or are watching this recording after the salon. We welcome you to post your questions, comments, and thoughts here in the live chat. Um, and Cat. There we go, private chat. Do Kat wanted me to thank everyone who's helped to build the Century Guild Salon Discord in these first 2 weeks. It's become a great community. And if you enjoy these monthly salon live stream discussions, we created the Discord to provide a similar after hours at the gallery experience. We've made a dedicated channel where we can all continue the discussion after the live stream ends. And if you join, you can still catch our end of summer reading challenge, where a lot of members have been sharing the fascinating books and short stories they've been reading. I haven't been in there. I've been bad. I've been reading a lot, but all current community members at the 1 month tier or higher can access and join. And Kat's going to post a link in the chat with simple steps on how to get into the Discord community. Oh, it looks like that link isn't. Oh, there we go. She's got it. So the thing that Kat had proposed this, and then I guess unbeknownst to her, posted in the Discord to ask which of these ideas that Kat was talking about would be good to talk about tonight. And Deshazia chimed in immediately and said, you should talk about the importance of physical objects for creatives. And so the thing that I did is it was a very hard thing kind of when I started to put my head to it. Because if you look at stone lithography, for example, all of it looks better in person than online. And if you look at especially oil paintings, posting a picture of an oil painting is not impressive. That's the thing. They need to be in person. An experience that I had recently is that Kat and I had gone to a museum, and I was looking at the Rembrandt paintings, and it was just a reminder of why Rembrandt is celebrated. It was just, they were so luminescent and had such a dimensional quality that you can't get not only on your phone, but even looking at things with your eyes. It was, I suppose that Fauvist artists like Matisse have that kind of sense of hyper reality as well in a different way. But with Rembrandt, it was balanced with this delicacy. And so I think that the thing that I believe is the most important, I was talking about this with a friend yesterday, is that one of the reasons that I will, if I'm buying a CD, I'll go into some of the chat rooms and look at which disc was taken perhaps from the analog masters instead of being a digital source. Or even when people ask me, well, which version of the Caligula release would you get? My answer is going to be the one that has the least compression on it. I don't know what that answer is yet. But for me, I feel like something we're losing culturally is the idea of those subtle increments of quality. And so for me, when I think about if someone is decorating their home, if someone is experiencing a film or an album, if you haven't attuned yourself to those levels of detail, you're lacking part of the experience yourself. And if you are a creative person, it removes your ability to elevate the experiences of others. And I think that elevating people's experiences is like a baseline fundamental responsibility. For me as a publisher, I have to choose the best possible paper stocks. I have to make sure that things are color corrected. If I'm not doing that, I'm putting more things into the world that lower our collective IQ and sensitivity. You don't want someone with high sensitivity to be developing that in a negative environment. It creates bad data. And when I say like good paper or color correcting, if part of the experience is that it's on pulpy paper, well, that's okay as long as that's the intent. But for so many people, these things become arbitrary or secondary thoughts. A good example, and this is not to be dismissive of anyone producing these Blu-rays for Caligula, but to me, the extras are relevant. The extras are wonderful and they're fine, but the core is the movie. And if you want people to watch a movie that you worked on, I want people to see it as closely as possible to what I intended when I was, overseeing the mastering and all of that. And same thing with the audio. Neil Young gets crazy about all of the audio stuff, but MP3s sound terrible. So I get it. When you hear master tapes, when you hear compact discs that have been really exquisitely mastered, it's a richer experience. You learn more as a musician hearing that. I'm saying this kind of as the contrary. You also learn something as a musician experiencing music on an old scratchy 45. So I'm not diminishing that experience because I think that it's the depth and breadth of, I love watching movies on 16 millimeter because I like the loss of information, but it's a conscious choice. I'm not watching a movie on that and thinking this is the way it looked for the director in their studio. I'm kind of getting a little off topic there, but I feel like I want to clarify that. I feel like a scratchy 45 or 16 millimeter film introduces opinion. I love older recordings because I love the sound of tubes. To me, clarity is not the goal. So an example with Caligula, we softened the grain only enough to make it look like it was an immaculate 35 millimeter print. When you see the grain on a negative, it's very crisp. And it's too much. It's too sharp. And the reality is no one would ever see it that way, because the act of striking a print removes a little bit of that information. So if someone just scanned the negatives and sent that out, that's not accurate to what the pure experience would have been. By the same token, when you use digital noise reduction and you soften the grain, you're removing the experience of watching it on film. And it makes it look very it makes it very I'm sorry, I was distracted by the chat with Kat. It makes it very like a soap opera. It just doesn't look right. So the point is that I was thinking, well, if we're trying to not have an opinion but recreate the experience of seeing it in a cinema in 1980, what do? You make it look like a pristine 35 millimeter print, that projected experience. So then when you see compression artifacts coming in, well, now we're stepping away from that experience. And it's maybe not as positive. Whereas perhaps if you watch a movie, like I was telling Kat this, I watched the second Venom movie the other night. And as I started to talk, she said, I could tell from your tone that it was terrible. I was like, oh, it was really bad. But if I watched it on 16 millimeter, I would have, I mean, I did like it. It was bad, but you know, it was what it was. If it had been released on 16 millimeter and it was kind of grindhousey, then it would have been perfect to me. Because that opinion of the campiness would have been magnified. And it's that way with a lot of, like, if you're listening to Motown, sometimes an old dusty 45 is a great way to hear it. So that was a long 10-minute explanation of sensitivity to content. I love opinion. I love opinions in art. I love when someone paints and they're showing you their lens of it. I love when a director is using maybe Petzval lenses or something that has fringe distortion. I love when color correction is peculiar or aggressive. I love that stuff. I think that that's the part of art. And so what I wanted to think of then for tonight is what are some of the things that I, to this day, remember as seminal turning points in my sensitivity and attunement. And so the first one is, and Kat's got some photos of these that she took earlier. The first one is going to be, where's my focal plane? The cat. Dun, 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 dun. This is a very, very short-lived series from 1972. And I would have bought this as a back issue, but I remember reading it in the barber shop as a kid. And the reason that I picked that is that older comic books have and Kat can pull up some of the photos to kind of show this. There's a density to the color printing that is richer than you see on modern printing. There's a comic cover, a modern comic, laid next to this to kind of show the surface texture difference. When you look at the light raking across that image, you can see the blocks of color. It's almost lithographic in its process. I think Kat's going to pull up the image of the two books just to kind of show. And so yeah, I mean, you can see the richness of color on the one and the way that the black on the other doesn't have the same density. There's also a slight milkiness to the other, a smoothness. It's more processed paper. You can see in the red on this, there's a little modeling. It's like there's a surface texture to the paper and the ink. And so something that I've done is I've bought, or pulled out stacks of books like this. And we had kind of a secret shelf in the library at the place we lived before where we live now. We had a little secret hidden room in the library where Tommy used to sit and read with a lantern. And I put a bunch of these old comic books in there. And part of it was I wanted him visually to be able to attune to those kind of colors and the texture of the brown newsprint paper, and the way that different papers take different colors. Like he's very sensitive, and I wanted him to get that kind of depth and breadth of sensory information. And it's something that in a very primitive way made me sensitive to texture and color and the way that ink relates to different papers. It's the scratchy 45 equivalent. But that's another thing, is when you look at restorations of books like this, how much is over restored. It's an ongoing discussion that people have. Oh, well, this paper was bad. They wanted it to look like this. I would argue that the dots in the printing and things like that are inherent to what the experience was for everyone who encountered it. And I wouldn't say that if someone released, a glossy, punched up version of this, that's terrible. But for me, I think that the purity of experience is something that is greater than the sum of its parts. Of course, if you were looking at this to look at the art, it'd be great to have a book that reprinted the art. There's a lot of those big oversized comic art books where they reprint the original art, and they're great. It's great to be able to see them without the color, with just the line work, with all the flaws. You take a step further, they don't look as good as seeing the original. So all of it is a different experience. But for me, this book is a really seminal moment for me. This era of comic is a seminal moment for me as a publisher. And this book and X-Men number 42. X-Men number 42 was the first back issue that I ever bought. And I remember talking to my dad when I bought it. It says on the cover, "The Death of Professor X." And I don't know how old I was, 8 or whatever. I remember telling my dad, Dad, this is the one where Professor X dies. And I had no idea. I was just a kid reading the cover, and, it was just a fun experience. But all of this printing, and then when you go through comics, this is going to, be a very narrow inside baseball, but there was a period where they started using a thing called Baxter paper, which was a white paper that they could get superior printing on, and those were then more higher end comic books. I think Marvel Fanfare was one of the first ones. But even that experience, I was learning how much paper affected the way art could be presented. And so this cat book is just kind of a seminal memory for me, and I love it. And it's funny because I not only have this comic, but I even had someone do a painting to recreate the cover. It's just, so I was thinking about that. I was like, well, it's obviously a seminal memory for me because it's just it's something I keep connecting to. And so that's where I traced that back to. And I just saw the thing pop up with Forrest saying the comics, the magazines, the Savage Sword of Conan. That's another thing, like the black and white or the grayscale art in those, the format. I mean, Creepy and Eerie were like that. Like I remember that being. Oh my God, there's a lot of comments in here. I just remember that being a big deal. Um, Hi everybody. I'm gonna go through super fast. Oh, happy birthday to Shazia. Lawrence of Arabia, an 8K scan from the 65 millimeter negative shows. I mean, it's that's an example. That's a great example. That's a movie I would never watch in 16 millimeter. It would be terrible. The point of that movie is the vastness of the cinematography. Yeah, that's a part where your education in sensitivity to different materials. Yeah, Lawrence of Arabia, an 8K scan of the 65 millimeter negative is going to be unbelievably beautiful. And yeah, these comments are all great. Thank you all so much. I and so then the second thing is we'll move away from publishing into my love of objects. This one's going to be kind of a hard one to show, but I I try to err in the direction of kindness. I very much do. I also have, my impish art snob mindset. And so something that I see a lot are people that love an aesthetic, but they don't really examine it. And so an example is I remember when I saw the movie, I think it was Underworld, and all these vampires were laying around in velvet clothing that looked like Hot Topic. And I remember reading Interview with a Vampire, or maybe it was Lestat where this happened, but I think it was Interview with a Vampire, where they were describing like a blue chambray work shirt that I think Louis was wearing. And I just remember that moment in reading and thinking, God, it makes sense that if you were hundreds of years old, you would have great taste. And if you were a vampire where you were sensitive to fabrics and things like that, both on your skin, but visually, you would want things that were finely woven and finely stitched. You would not be wearing Hot Topic velvet clothing. And so I always remembered that. And so I shifted from things that had a vibe and into really trying to get into quality. And so I'll see things where maybe someone's got some great fabrics, but they'll have, a lamp that at the end of the day is kind of a garage sale lamp. And maybe there's just so much of it that it feels like a, Gothic environment. And I have no problem with that. But the thing that I would like to encourage in people, the thing that I would like to challenge is if you were hundreds of years old and you're replacing things, well, where does your sensitivity come in? And it's at the point now where my living space is more refined than that Hot Topic aesthetic. I remember being in my early 20s and buying a Victorian dressing screen that was kind of messed up. And I still have it. I love it. But then as you get into the idea of your sensitivity tunes into what's really legitimately museum quality. And it's often not expensive to do that. You can buy an antique lithograph from the turn of the century for $100. and spend $150 to put it in a beautiful frame. And then there's people who will spend $10 on something cheap and then spend $150 to put it in a frame. So the difference between 160 and 250 is, if you're, it's marginal if you are at a point where you're trying to make decisions about your living environment. So there's an album cover, and we won't show it here, but it was for a band called Lions and Ghosts, that to me was just like, I looked at that and I was like, that's a great space. And it was a guy's house in England where they shot the photo. And so I kind of was tuning into the idea that my Vincent Price aesthetic, that you could be elevating it with like an antique clock or things like that instead of a plastic skull statue or something. And so the first thing that I bought, not something I found from a family member or things like that, but the first thing that I remember buying that was my step in elevating my taste. I was in an antique store and I saw this bowl, and it's called Carnival Glass. Sorry, Carnival Glass. And Kat can post some pictures of this. But it's a thick glass that has like a salt spray that creates this beautiful iridescence. And Kat, like if you put up the photo of it maybe on one of the tables or something, to me, I was thinking, okay, that doesn't, as an object, scream Vincent Price or haunted house. But it's the kind of thing that you would expect to see on the mantle. And so the funny thing is there was a stand that it was on. I've got the stand right here. And the guy had the glass priced, but he wouldn't sell me the stand. And I must have negotiated with the guy for, I don't know, a long time. He didn't want to sell the stand because he was a dealer, and it was kind of a junk shop. But the guy was like, no, I don't want to sell it. I wound up offering him probably almost as much as I paid for the glass, just because I was like, come on, man, you could buy another one. I told him why. I was like, I want this because it looks perfect to me the way it is. I want the whole thing to move. And so then I just kind of started learning about antiques. I started learning about things that weren't what I grew up with, things that weren't in a normal kid's ecosystem, things that were from a generation, a couple before mine. And I started looking, I mean, you can see in the background, you can see my weird lamp. That's a cheap lamp. That's a repro lamp. And then I've got a great piece of German Art Nouveau next to it. And then the walls have wood paneling. And, the point is you can start to bake in a space like it's a great stew or something if you're introducing elements that by themselves are really beautiful and cool. And so that was the first step for me in mature decorating. Because you can take that out of the environment. And it's not that people would say that's cool and it's in a quirky way, like some taxidermy where the stuffing is falling out or something like that, or a weird old cool box, but the pieces of it are all rusty and chipping or something. It's not that. We're like, it works in the thing. But separate, it's a beautiful object that is an example of maturity. And I don't mean that like, to demean any other decorating style. I guess I'm just saying that for me, it was an evolutionary step in saying, this does not appeal to me in a kitschy way. It appeals to me in a way that feels romantic in its sense of excellence. Subsequently, I have very few pieces of carnival glass left, but I do have a few because there are ones that are great examples. If they're older, if they're beautifully executed, that I can put in a room with porcelain, that's worth a fortune, and it still looks cool. It's still, I can put that on an Art Nouveau cabinet. And, there's part of it that is a little bit, like I see the flaws in it now. I see, oh, you can see the lines in it even in this picture. Like, oh, it's clearly a molded piece. And those lines, a lot of them when they were hot, they'd be thrown onto straw to cool. And they were just kind of carnival prizes. That's how they got the name. But, but that the depth of iridescence, the gradations of tone is really exceptional. I've seen, so now if I see a modern iridescence, whether it's on newer carnival glass or even like a modern, say like Hungarian Jolne, which are reproductions of turn of the century Art Nouveau, my eyes are so attuned to iridescence. This is a funny way to put it. I can tell when it was created before the OSHA laws stepped in. This bowl has got some level of radioactivity to it. They would be using uranium and iridium and things like that. And, it was probably not the best working conditions. But my eyes are really tuned into that. If you put 10 pieces out of any kind of iridescent pottery or glass, and said one of them is modern and the rest are old, or vice versa, I would absolutely be able to tell. And part of that is because I've been living with this thing for, 30 years, whatever. No, more than, I don't know, 30 years. So that's the importance to me then. With the first one, it was about surface printing. With the other, or with this one, it's the same thing. It's about texture. If you grow up in a house that has old wood, you'll see alligatoring of wood. The finish, because it was made with like knots from trees, they would boil them and make a glaze, and that's how they would paint the varnish on. And that varnish over time shrinks. So if you're in an old house from the turn of the century and its original finish, you'll see an alligatoring surface that's darker, it's pulling away, and then what's beneath it is just the stained wood, and it'll have a nice glow to it. It's those kind of things that are like, if you're hypersensitive the way that I am, it's that thing of how do you turn that into your superpower. So instead of just feeling barraged by things in the world, how do you use it to create a better experience for other people? Meaning, if I keep saying, I apologize. If I'm curating a booth or an exhibition or something, you're not going to see reproductions in there. You're not going to see things that don't have an excellence in its surface, an excellence in its iridescence. If I'm looking at turn of the century pottery like Massier or the people who did that work, I'm very tuned in to when areas are burned out or areas are not what they could be. There was a guy once, I remember, we had a small vase that was, I don't remember. It might have been, it was expensive. And there was another dealer that had the same form at 1/10 of the price. And he asked the question, well, why is yours more expensive? And I remember the thing that we would say to people is that if you can't tell the difference, you should buy the cheaper one. And the idea is that we were selling work to people who could tell the difference and needed that level of difference. So the gentleman wound up buying our piece because he kept going back and forth between the two booths. And at one point, we took the piece down there. I mean, unfortunately, the dealer was not happy about this, but we held them next to each other. And it was like, if there's no difference to you, why would you pay 3,000 instead of 300? But he was able to see it. And that started him on a collection that became exceptional because he wanted the pieces that had that attention to detail. And what happened with glazes, for people who don't know, is that you'd have a factory that would make a form, and different people who worked at the factory would do the glazes. And so sometimes you would get one that had a lot of precision, a lot of sensitivity to tone and color and palette. And then you'd have another one where it would just be like someone took a can of spray paint is what it looked like. And it would be uneven and no detail. You know, they were mass manufactured, a lot of that in the day. Easily hundreds, if not thousands in some cases with forms. Not that they survived, but so before I go to the last one, let me look at the comments. Yeah, Andrew, I feel that way with contemporary comics. Like, they're glossy, they look great, I think. But yeah, unfortunately for my kid, I have stacks of these old comics everywhere. So in his mind, I guess it's like those movies where somebody grows up in a bomb shelter. According to my kid, yeah, Conan, it's still, I don't know, maybe my kid thinks it's 1977. But yeah, I think that I don't like the way a lot of those new ones look. And in Forrest, I do agree with that idea about it carrying your soul forward when you have something with quality. I think that that's a very romantic way to put it, but I feel like even if you're just completely pragmatic about everything, when someone, it's like Muka saying, would you like to see the thing that I've put my soul into? When an artist took the time to really focus on detail and their sensibilities and making sure that the thing that someone is holding a year or a century later had part of their sensibility in it, like, that's a form of immortality. It's a form of saying, I believed enough in this to spend the extra time on it. And I do, much to the chagrin of some people, I have that sense of ownership on things. Caligula was way overdue, and it did go over budget. And I'm immensely and unbelievably grateful that they supported me through that. And then I feel like the validation then is getting invited to premiere at Cannes. And hopefully then that also rewards them and that it's profitable for them. I can see where creatively it would be crushing to find yourself in situations where you weren't able to do that. And I've been lucky that I feel like I've developed a good relationship with where the line is. I'm not going to spend 20 years on something. You do get to the point where there's the law of diminishing returns. But like the Le Pater book, there were times I had to completely step away from it. And people on Kickstarter were furious, but there were so many times where someone I respected would say to me, it's not going to matter a year or 100 years from now, what day it was done. What's going to matter is if it was great. And I saw something the other day where someone was talking about movie releases and made that same comment. Like, nobody cares about how long a movie took if the movie is bad. And if it's good, or no, they were talking about records. That's what it was. It was Bruce Springsteen talking about friends of his that would be like, I got to get this out by October. And he would say, I have records that took me 3 years to make and records that took me 4 days. And he said, but when it was done was when I felt that I was proud of it. And I loved hearing him say that because that was the best advice that I got. So to anyone creative listening to this, there's Adam Jones from Tool said this, and this really resonated with me. He said, it's not good when it's done when it's good. And I just, I think that's a great quote. I think it's a great way to look at it. Letterpress stuff is great. Where's the track? Oh my God. All right. Sean is asking about a Doctor Who costume that I have. Where does it fit into my love of Art Nouveau? Funnily enough, if you're creating a 19th century dandy salon and you're filling it with weird Art Nouveau and iridescent ceramics and art glass chandeliers, a giant snail creature has a lot more to do with Art Nouveau and fantasy illustration of that era than a Cyberman costume, maybe. In retrospect, I wish I'd bought a Cyberman costume just because it's more iconic. But yeah, I had my parlor room when I lived in Chicago before, had these beautiful walls with German Art Nouveau Jugendstil stenciling and, of course, Gale's paintings and the pottery. And there was a giant snail in the room that Chandra put a little hat on at one point. It was very funny. Oh, Andrew, I hope your health is okay. I'm sorry to hear that that's a problem. I would say this. It's my opinion. Books are meant to be read. You're not going to spoil the pages. This is going to make you cringe with saying that you're waiting for your health to improve before you can go through it. A lot of my books, I'll do things like dog ear the pages or make a marking in it or things like that. And I know that makes book collectors crazy. But I feel like the books that I have that I cherish as a work of art are the worst. Like, I have a book, Michael Moorcock, after he wrote the introduction to Le Pater, sent me a copy of a big Elric hardcover that he wrote a beautiful note to me in. And I have it in a plastic bag, and I haven't read the book. I buy another copy to read. And that's not great. I should be reading the book that he handled, that he sent to me. So I kind of have this love-hate relationship with the idea of books as a thing to just be, cherished. You and I are both vinyl record guys. Of course you want the record to be clean. I always love when the jackets are in great condition because I love that art. When it comes to things like comic books, I like when they're in good condition, but I'm not afraid to read them while I'm eating. I remember one time, Gale, I think it was like I bought Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, #1, and whatever it was. And she, I don't know if I was doing something like reading it in the bathtub or something, and she'd walked in, whatever I was doing, eating or something, and she's like, "Isn't that the book you just paid $300 for today?" And I was like, "Yeah," and she just shook her head. But for me, it was like I wanted the book, I want to live with it, I want to experience it. There's just so many ways that I do preserve things for future generations, but we are all complicated and complex people. And so, like, if I have a book like, a nice little hardbound copy of The Prophet, I won't do that. If I've got a paperback that's on silent film history, and there's a thing on there and it mentions Joseph Fennick or something, I will dog ear the page. If it's an older book or if it's got like, kind of that nice cream paper, which will key into the book I'm about to show you, I won't do that. But if it's, a modern kind of thing. So I'm not saying you should dog ear the pages, but, I want you to read it. I want you to enjoy it and love it. When you're a kid, I am sure, Deshazia, that antique stores are boring. Hello, David. Hello, everybody. Brandon, do you think that growing sensitivity from art translates to every other aspect of art? And the answer is unquestionably. Unquestionably. It is contagious. If you start... So the friend's house I was at yesterday, she was successful as a art director, marketing person, and great designer. She's also an audiophile, and so she had her expensive record cleaner and all her, incredible first pressing, great sounding stuff, and high-end receiver and all of that. And it's like, well, of course, because she's tuned in to detail. And if you put on something and there's a depth and breadth to it, and you can hear that because the speakers are great, the receiver is great, the turntable is good, the record is a good pressing, it's going to be the same thing when you're looking at the way shapes interact with each other. In a design. Makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Justin Hawkins from The Darkness, and of course now a YouTube personality, has the most amazing collection of modernist furniture and, some objects and things like that. And of course, he's like a fashion hound. But it makes sense. He's really sensitive to music and tone. And it applies to other things in his life. Like, I think it's very common. Gail Pataki, incredibly sensitive to design in fashion and fabrics and textures and stitching and things like that. And that affects the way she looks at brushstrokes on canvas. So I do think absolutely. Yeah, smooth, soft, and glossy is not great. And Andrew, I'm so sorry to hear that you're dealing with this. I hope that you are okay. I have, Andrew, it's funny. I have a postcard that you sent to me that was a drawing that you did. It was a landscape. And it is one of the things that I most treasure, because it's one of the most personal things that anyone had ever sent to me. It might be the most. And the idea, and I mean, not only that you're such a great illustrator, but that what I'm looking at when I look at that was what you were looking at that day. It makes me feel very connected to you and to that moment in time. So thank you for sending that. It is something that I know that I wrote you a thank you note, but I don't think you understand how deeply I appreciate that. It is one of the things that I treasure extremely deeply. I'm glad that you had a positive experience with Mike. He was really, really nice to me. He's been really nice. I have to admit, I don't really talk to him. I'm extremely intimidated. Extremely intimidated. I'm just too big of a fan. I just can't do it. I'm too afraid. I've met so many people that have turned out to be jerks in some way. I'm just too afraid of just rubbing him the wrong way with something and him just hating me. It's like I can't deal with it. And in a funny way, I gave an interview with the Telegraph 2 days ago, and something that came up in the interview, and I doubt it'll make it in, but they were asking about Malcolm McDowell, and I said, it's funny. They say don't meet your idols, and I said, but I would add to that, unless your idol is Malcolm McDowell, because Malcolm is absolutely someone that I could see rubbing the wrong way. He's a strong character, strong personality. But that said, just a huge heart and an awesome dad. I'm really grateful that I've gotten to know him. Uh-oh, cotton gloves, Andrew. Oh my gosh. A Gallifreyan translator. That's crazy. It's very cool. I haven't watched Doctor Who in a long time. Way, way, way behind. David Tennant was the last one that I followed religiously. Not for any reason other than just work and life. And I've heard such great things about different seasons and different actors and characters. But I just watch so little now. Yeah, Andrew, you're wonderful. I appreciate you immensely. So I'm going to show you. See, I love Peter Capaldi. I know he would be a great doctor. I know he would. I'm going to go to the last one. The last thing. And so this was something I was trying to think, like, what is the first book that I remember really cherishing as a treasure? And the first book that I remember that with is an old Bible that I don't know where it is. But it had a zipper around it, and someone gave it to me as a gift when I was young, and it was just such a beautiful object. And so then I thought, okay, but what else? What's another one that I remember getting? And of course, there's all my science fiction paperbacks and things like that. And I was like, but that falls in with that cat comic. And so the thing that I landed on is the first book that I remember feeling, a lot of this when I talked about the glass object. Was kind of an escalation of maturity. And I used to love the Chariots of the Gods books. I loved books on mythology. I had all of that stuff since I was a kid. But the first book that I got that I felt involved me reading it with a part of my brain that I hadn't fully explored in this way, that I touched on with aesthetic elements or perhaps symbolist elements in the case of mythology and things like that. And it is a book that is a Rosicrucian book called The Mysteries of Osiris, Ancient Egyptian Initiation. And I remember finding this in a used bookstore and feeling like, well, this is what a magic book feels like. This is what, when you discover the old tome, it's got the gilt edges. I don't think you can see it very well in this light. Maybe this angle is better. There you go. And it's on just a beautiful, beautiful cream paper. It's got that letterpress kind of texture to it. The black is when they were still using the dense lead inks. I just got a big book recently that I'm so anxious to read, but I can tell that the text is gray. It's a soy-based ink. I can tell because this book has lead ink. The black is denser. And I have to be honest, I'm really anxious to read this book, and I can't do it. When I'm reading it, I feel like my vision is failing because the color of the ink, I think this person used digital printing for the contents. It's on a great paper, but the ink isn't rich enough. And with the choice of a little more sensitive font, I literally can't read it. And so that's what made me think of this, is this is the book that I remember being everything. I'd had books that had the antique paper. I'd had books that had the beautiful black ink. I'd had books that had leather covers. I'd had books that had stamping. I had all of it. But I didn't have anything where it was all together with information that was taking ideas that I had been fascinated with in fantasy, in mythology, in art, in philosophy, anything, whatever stuff you read as a kid, religion, and amalgamated it into something that made all of those things make sense together. And so that's something that, obviously right now I've got this thing, Magic Show, that I'm a producer on. And, a lot of the idea of magic to me is pantomime. It's no different than being into country music. It's a character that people put on. And, to me, there was an interview that I'd read, and I'm paraphrasing in a super vague way. And I believe it was with Crowley. And he said, the interviewer had asked him, I think it was in Playboy or something, well, what's the magical way to open that door? And he said, well, I would go over to that door. I would put my hand on the handle. I would turn it, and I would push. And I remember the idea in that moment of thinking, okay, so magical thinking isn't about a fairy tale. It isn't about the idea of, it's like the equivalent of thoughts and prayers. I don't like that. I don't like that idea. I like the idea of effort. I like the idea of focus. I like the idea of spinning the plates in your universe so that when you take a step back, that it turns into Van Gogh's The Starry Night. I remember one of the books that changed my perception on this was I bought this little Michael Jordan book. It was called I Can't Accept Not Trying. A peculiar double negative, but I read this book and I thought this is the most effective book on magical thinking that I might have ever read. And magical thinking, not like in a clinical sense where you're living in fantasy, but the idea of the way that you imagine what you want to see in the world, and you don't accept failure, and you interact with what is present and you interact with your limitations and your perceptions. And that idea that, not that Michael Jordan said this, but the idea that alchemy is self-transformation, like that's the ultimate act of anyone who is interested in magic. And so it's kind of funny because a lot of the things that go into that magic world are very much things that I do disagree with. Like I said, I feel like it's a character like country music. But I've also had really strange things happen that aren't completely explicable. So I do like the idea that there's a lot of misty territory between what we know and what we don't, I think is the best way to put it. At the end of the day, I'm very cynical and very pragmatic. A lot of the things that I love about this book is that there's a lot of history, there's a lot of just ways of looking at thinking that I just love, that I just agree with. But the reason I'm showing it today is its idea as an object and what it represents. I'm finding song titles of things that I wrote decades ago. I am finding notes in here for band rehearsal and directions. That's very funny. There's a Doug Klauba poster in here. Little Doug Klauba. Where's my field of focus there? Look at that. Thomas Negovan, little concert with Doug Klauba. And what is this? Oh, look at stage direction. I'm not going to show that many. Here's the Doug Klauba thing. That's very nice. That was the black and white days where we were Xeroxing things and leaving them at record stores. But so, yeah, so the point of this for me was when it wasn't, like I have an old copy of Peter Pan that I treasure. You know, there are lots of books that I had before this that are beautiful and magnificent. But for me, this is the idea for me that not that books like Peter Pan aren't transformative, but I think this was the book for me that made me recognize the way that, in a way that a textbook or a fairy tale or anything didn't maybe help me recognize the way that it could be transformative. And so, Le Pater was completely intended to be a transformative book. If someone reads that book and they don't feel just microscopically more sensitive to their fellow humans by the end of that, I did not succeed in what I was trying to do. My hope is that there's a younger kid, you know, someone in high school that finds one at a book sale, reads it, and recognizes that it doesn't matter what country you live in or what century, that we are all connected by these same feelings, wanting to be safe, wanting to be loved, wanting to feel connected, recognizing and respecting that that's not, maybe if your life has pummeled you and you view that desire for connection as an exposure that could be considered a weakness, that's not the case, that it's a healthy thing. Caligula was absolutely manipulated to be transformative. The ideas that we are finite and in many ways representatives of archetypes that repeat over and over throughout history, all of us are, is something that's a really strong message in Caligula. There's also things that, because Hermeticism is based in classicism, there's a lot of Hermeticism in Caligula, him leaping up the marble steps into ascension. There's just a lot of things that kind of, I think, at the time seemed just like classical storytelling, but it works. It works in these symbolic ways if you pick the right things and put them together. And so, yeah, so that to me, that was the representation of that book and the sensitivity to the way those things can converge to create something. Would I have had that experience if it was just a paperback? I don't know that I would have. If it was on paper that was yellowed and starting to smell like a lot of those cheap grocery store paperbacks did back in the day, I don't know that I would have had that. So it is that convergence, and to me, that's the transformative elements. And I am going to say thank you because it's 4 minutes over. And I do then, I'm going to repeat this in case anyone wasn't here. Kat wants me to make sure that I thank everyone, and I do sincerely, that's been coming to the Salon Discord. The thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to maneuver when you're operating on Facebook or social media, that's someone else's platform. We're trying to figure out how to cultivate a space that is like hanging out in the gallery that we used to have. And it's an extension of what we're doing here. So yes, if you're paying $1 to be part of the Patreon and that gets you into the Discord, I look at that as that's buying a cup of tea every hour just to keep the cafe going. I turn that money around into other creators. The Patreon's not intended to be a money-making thing, but I do feel like it's the idea that we could gather somewhere for free. It doesn't seem as sustainable as what we're trying to build, and that's where the Discord comes in. So I think Kat is going to be going over there now. I believe that's the point, is that there is a community there. A dedicated channel where we can all continue the discussion after live stream ends. So yeah, we can go over there. People can post some things about maybe some of the things. Grab a book off the bookshelf. And so I'm going to sign off. I'm going to thank you. First Thursday of every month. I appreciate you guys immensely. Thank you so much for being here. And let's all give a big virtual hug to Andrew. Andrew, I hope that you are okay. And I'll message you. Let's talk a little bit. And let's get you better soon. I hope you're listening to some good music and getting rest. All right, thank you so much. And I'll see you. I'll log in. I will go over onto the Discord as well.